You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
So anyway, without further ado, I want to invite a conservative friend, a very intelligent, thoughtful guy. So Paul is Senior Policy Analyst at the Committee for Constructive Tomorrow, also known as CFACT, as well as Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE. The good core, not the bad core, and both public policy institutes that are promoting environmental stewardship, helping to enhance human life and welfare, and really put a personal liberties and civil rights focus on things. And that's why I asked Paul to join us today, because, Paul, before we go into a couple of these issues, I'm going to ask you an obvious tongue-in-cheek question. First, welcome to the Final Say.
Thanks for having
me. Oh, my pleasure. Paul, do conservatives hate the environment the same way we do women, the poor, and puppies, or are people being misinformed by the real fact?
Well, obviously, we hate the poor and the women and the environment equally. If you believe any of this garbage that comes out of the minds and mouths of our more liberal friends out there. I've been an environmentalist all my life. Was involved in Sierra Club a long time ago, and Boy Scouts, Eagle Scouts, involved in camping, hiking, kayaking, all kinds of outdoor activities, and I still pay huge attention to environmental issues. Unfortunately, the environmental movement has been taken over by the really hardcore zealots, and I don't think they care a whole lot about bees or birds, the environment, or people. They are driven by other things, an ideological agenda, for example, that's largely anti-pesticide, anti-hydrocarbons, anti-growth. They certainly want power and control over our lives, our economy, energy, job creation. They certainly love raking in the money from foundations and government agencies and like-minded people, or people who are just not sharp enough to pick up on what's really going on. And they know they can't be really held accountable for their lies or the lost jobs they cause, the lives they cost, the ecological damage they cost. For example, bird kills from wind turbines. And that's a very different environmental movement than Patrick Moore and I were involved in a long time ago. Patrick is one of the co-founders of Greenpeace, by the way, who has had a huge break with them and doesn't have a whole lot of good things to say about the Greenpeace crowd or the broader radical environmental crowd.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Paul, because I grew up hunting, fishing, hiking, and still spend a lot of time outdoors, and I love it. There's not I have made good friends crawl through like 100 yards of thorns to go get a bottle that they threw in the woods. Even when I was a teenager, I did that. So I'm very much about the environment, but I'm also about intellectual honesty, and rational thinking, and maybe most importantly, integrity. Like, to me, I don't want to hear, and I don't want this to get into an Al Gore bashing because I want to touch on some of the subjects, but I don't want to hear somebody like Al Gore pontificate when he's about the what we're doing to the earth while he's flying around with a carbon footprint that would make Bigfoot look like a newborn. I mean, it's really sad. The biggest problem to me, to a large extent, and I want to get your opinion on this directly, is I think that the environment has become a very successful weapon to use against conservatives, and which is why I opened it up with the tongue-in-cheek comment I did. And the way it's being done, in my opinion, beyond the what you see in the airwaves, is that so much of the research that is funded, I believe, is very often outcome-based research. And people who are receiving the funds know that if they want to continue in their job, if they want to continue receiving funds, and if they want to get get more grants, they have to meet the outcome expectations. And I, for one, want to see honesty. I want to know if something's good or bad. Is it going to kill my children or not? Or is it the lesser of evils? How have you seen that and is it as big a problem as I'm making it out to be?
No, I think it actually is, maybe even a much bigger problem than you're making it out to be. It's very much facts versus feelings, facts versus propaganda. It's huge billions of dollars a year from federal agencies to these scientists and pressure groups and so forth that do outcome-based research and, even worse, just propagandize the line that the EPA, for example, is pushing on climate change or mercury or asthma or any of the other issues. The American Lung Association gets tens of millions of dollars a year from EPA. And they only get it because they hoe the environmentalist and EPA line on these things. When you start adding up all these dollars just for the American-based environmentalist industry, you're talking about an $8 billion a year industry. And it is essentially anti-people, because when you're implementing 1,900 rules like EPA did since President Obama took office, and thousands of other rules on the environment and other issues, you're coming in and you're stopping energy development. You're costing people's livelihoods, their jobs, and when you do that, you impact their living standards. You put them under tremendous stress, and you cost lives. People that are under that kind of stress, lousy nutrition, longer work hours to bring in less money, they die younger. And none of that is ever factored into any of these rules. So we have an environmentalist industry that is not doing anything for the environment, is doing really bad things for our economy, our people's lives, and our living standards. It's a bad combination.
Now let's jump into a couple of specifics. So, I have a background, as you know, in the energy sector as well. And, two of the things that you have done much research and writings on. One is fracking. The other is a very common green subject called windmills. And what the good and the bad are. So let's take, for example, these wind farms. Wind farms are not without their problems, and you would think that if you don't want to support wind farms wholly, again, you're like a crazy evil Republican. But people have to understand that wind farms require a significant impact on the environment, because most of that wind is coming from some place where the wind has to be there. Those electrons have to be piped in. So they're going to be decimating the environment to create new high tension, high power lines, transmission lines to bring those in. But what are some of the other major problems that you've seen with wind, and have you seen successes in wind power where there's a middle ground that can be had?
Well, I haven't really seen many successes, but what I've seen is huge subsidies. None of those wind farms would exist without the enormous subsidies, without the high-priced electricity, without the mandates that power companies take the wind-generated electricity whether they need it or not. And for California and New York, for example, it raises the electricity prices to double what the average American is paying for the New York and California markets. You've got enormous impacts just from having the turbines on the property. There are health impacts on the people living around it from the turbine subsonic noise and from the wind, the flicker from the blades crossing in front of the sun. The bird and bat impacts are 1,000 times higher than what the wind industry or the environmentalists or the politicians are willing to admit. And the way they are able to hide the slaughter is they manipulate the studies that are done around the wind turbines. The birds and bats are struck and flung, catapulted by the wind turbine blades 100 to 200 meters away from the towers, and yet the bulk of the studies, almost 95% of the studies, are only 50 meters away. So they're missing about 95% of the area that's actually likely to contain these bird carcasses and bat carcasses. A lot of them they don't even mention. You almost never see geese or swan or duck statistics in these bird counts. You rarely see bats listed, and yet we know that vast numbers of them, entire flocks, will fly right into the turbine blades and be wiped out. So it's a deliberate obfuscation of the reality of what the wind turbines are doing. The environmental groups, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and other agencies that are responsible for enforcing our endangered species and migratory bird and bat laws are ignoring this, and they're actually complicit with the wind industry in hiding all this mortality data. The numbers I've been running suggest that instead of 100,000 or 400,000 birds a year, you're really looking at something like 13 to 40 million birds and bats every year just from the 40,000 wind turbines here in the United States. So the impacts are huge. And then you've got, of course, those long transmission lines. If you build a nuclear power plant, you can put it right next door to your market. You build a gas-fired turbine, you can build it right in the middle of the market or right next to it. You build these wind turbines, they're hundreds of miles away. So you've got those long high-tension transmission line impacts that you were just mentioning. And then you go back to China, where they're mining all the rare earth minerals. The desecration to the agricultural and wildlife habitat lands there is monumental. The impacts on human health from the mining and the processing and so forth, the smelting, is enormous. None of that is ever factored into any of these clean wind energy analyses.
Yeah, I'm sorry, one of our listeners just pointed out you can get caught with a single hawk feather and end up paying a huge fine.
Right, that's right, or an eagle feather, you'll go to jail. But if you kill 100 of them with your wind turbine, you go away scot-free. Absolutely right.
Then you get an EPA merit badge?
No, you get a Fish and Wildlife Service fine, and then you get a letter of commendation from the White House.
Yeah. Hey, I've noticed, by the way, that Jeffrey Immelt early on in this president's administration was crawling. He was, if I recall, for like the first 2 years, the top non-staff visitor in the White House. And, of course, Jeffrey Immelt from GE being probably by a large measure the biggest beneficiary to these subsidies in this subject. So I think that's kind of interesting. But I want to turn really quickly, if I can,
and keep in mind that our taxpayer money is paying for the wind turbines, and then the wind turbine operators are turning around and using our taxpayer money as contributions to the politicians who keep the funds coming through the production tax credit and other subsidies. So it's a really nasty circle. Corporatism at its worst.
I want to turn to fracking, if I may. Fracking to me is probably a perfect example of these types of issues that we really need to be all over, because it's so profoundly important. I mean, if we get it wrong and if there are legitimate problems, we should know, at minimum, so we could work around them. We could find obvious solutions. The worst thing in the world is to spend billions of dollars solving problems that don't exist or decimating an industry. And as you came onto the show, we were talking about Iran and the Middle East and what I think is by far the biggest problem we face. So in a couple of minutes we have left, I think fracking, even if it does have some honest environmental side effects, to me it may be one of the few cures both to our economy and to neutering the people who are building nuclear power plants with the intent to build nuclear weapons who want us dead. So I don't want to drag you into Middle Eastern politics, but what's the reality in fracking from your opinion and your research? What should we know? What's the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Well, number one, they've never proven any groundwater contamination. It's never been shown in a couple million of wells that have been fracked in the United States. Number two, the earthquakes they talk about are like a truck coming down your street. They're below a 3 on a Richter scale. You don't even feel them. Number three, the amount of oil and gas that's coming out of the ground is enormous, and the money coming out of the ground as a result is in the many, many tens of billions of dollars. When it comes to wind and solar, we're pouring tens of billions of dollars out of our treasury, out of our taxpayers' pockets to fund those industries. When it comes to fracking, we're creating tens of thousands of jobs, millions of jobs actually, over 1.5 million so far just because of fracking. And we're generating hundreds of billions of dollars in revenues for the state and federal governments that are receiving tax and royalty funds from the fracking operations. So it's a huge benefit to the economy rather than a drain on the economy. It's also driven electricity prices down significantly, where you're using gas to power turbines as opposed to wind power, which drives the price of electricity way up and kills jobs. For every job that's created by wind power subsidies, you're killing 2 to 4 jobs because the price of electricity goes up so high that more people get laid off. So those are just a few of the realities. And when you look at what's happened in Pennsylvania, Texas, North Dakota, Louisiana, West Virginia, other states that have been promoting fracking, the benefits in jobs and revenues and employees' income are phenomenal, with no environmental side effects that I've been able to ascertain anywhere. There's a lot of scare stories coming out of Hollywood and Jeff Fox and the pressure groups, but they've never been able to back up a single one of them with actual evidence.
Now plus, Paul, these are infrastructure-oriented jobs that are not easily outsourced jobs. So we're keeping the money here, but we're also keeping the underlying manufacturing here. We're getting really close to the end of the show, so I'm gonna ask you to maybe in the last minute let the audience know how they can help the organizations you're a part of, where to find those organizations, and then Paul, we're going to have you back. The B subject is particularly fascinating to me because of the potential impact and the honesty. So we'll have to cover that subject matter on another day. But in the last minute, if you will, again, let people know where to find you and how they can help you.
Two places to look for my things are townhall.com. You'll find about 6 years' worth of my articles there. And another place is CFACT.org, CFACT.org, Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. We're very active on college campuses and all over the United States and world. We attend the UN conferences and try to keep them honest, as hard as that is. And we're involved in all these different issues. We also run the ClimateDepot.com website, which is a great go-to source for information on climate change, facts and fallacies and myths.
Excellent. Well, Paul, I appreciate you joining us here in the Final Say. I encourage people to read. I read as many of your writings as I can. I think they're usually great. And I'll thank you and say to the people, what I like about the kind of work that you do is I don't care what the truth is. I want to know the truth, and I want honesty. If we know what the truth is, we can deal with it. Again, thanks for joining us, Paul, today. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of another great episode of The Final Say. Again, thanks to our guest, Paul Driessen, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you again tomorrow on The Final Say, 3 to 4 p.m. live. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. Have an awesome evening.